first point last week and partly in the second point, so we're just going to pick up where we left off. So if you do have your Bibles, turn them to Genesis chapter 37, and we're going to read again verses 1 through 17, but we're really going to start in verse 3 when I actually start talking about this. But let's go back to chapter 37, and we'll read verses 1 through 17. So give me an amen when you get there. Amen. Okay. Let's stand, if you're able. Now Jacob lived in the land where his father had lived as a stranger in the land of Canaan. These are the records of the generations of Jacob. Joseph, when he was 17 years of age, was pasturing the flock with his brothers while he was still a youth, along with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought back a bad report about them to their father. Now Jacob loved Joseph more than all of his other sons because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a multicolored tunic. And his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all of his brothers, so they hated him and could not speak to him on friendly terms. Then Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. Please listen to this dream which I have had. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf stood up and also remained standing, and behold, your sheaves gathered around and had bowed down to my sheaf. Then his brothers said to him, are you actually going to reign over us? Or are you actually going to rule over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he had yet another dream, and informed his brothers of it, and said, behold, I have had yet another dream, and behold, the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. He also told it to his father as well as to his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have had? Am I and your mother and your brothers actually going to come to bow down to the ground before you? And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Then his brothers went to pasture their father's flock in Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, are your brothers not pasturing the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send you to them. And he said to him, I will go. Then he said to him, go now and see about the welfare of your brothers and the welfare of the flock, and bring word back to me. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. A man found him, and behold, he was wandering in the field, and the man asked him, what are you looking for? He said, I am looking for my brothers. Please tell me where they are pasturing the flock. Then the man said, they have moved from here, for I heard them say, let's go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. May the Lord bless our reading. You may be seated. The last time we were together, we looked at point number 1, setting up things. And really, I argued that verse 1 really belongs with the previous section, where it explains where Edom, Esau settled, and then where Jacob settled, and how Esau ends his story with these kings and these rulers and all of these people, these princes, before Israel ever had that. And then it ends, and then it picks up with the Toledot, or the generations of Jacob, and that story begins with Joseph was 17 years old. And then, so I introduced us into the Joseph story and started setting it up, and then we looked at, partly we got into the idea of these puns that are in the text that are painting a painful picture, verses 2 through 4. And by this time, I was about 15 minutes over, so I want to revisit this section to introduce us to where we're actually going to go. We're going to see today the dreams. Dreaming dreams and heightening hate, verses 5 through 11. And then point number 4 is divine intervention or a random rambler, verses 12 through 17. And we're going to see what the Word of God could teach us today. So I'm going to skip through setting things up. We'll just kind of run through that. And wanted you to remember to look out for the closing, the change of standing every time Joseph's clothes changed. We're going to look at the dreams today. Look at Reuben and Judah and their relationship, and how Judah is listened to more than Reuben because Reuben tried to usurp his father, so he's not on good terms. Look at the movement. They go down to Egypt and how that takes place. Also look at the movement of, as they go down to Egypt, Joseph's actually ascending in the political sphere of Egypt. And then there's a lot of favoritism in the story. Joseph is the one that's favored, but when he's perceived dead, the favoritism transfers over to Benjamin, but never is it to the other son. And then I asked us to enjoy the story. So that's what I'm hoping we could do some of that today. All right, so that was just a general idea of setting up things, okay? Now, so now let's take puns painting a painful picture, and we looked at a new Toledot. I'll skip through this. And then we looked at who is shepherding whom, and I made the case that Joseph was shepherding his brothers. And then now we're going to look at favoritism from retrofractures, and we're actually going to start in verse 3. So I want you to read verse 3 right there on the slide. It says, "Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a vari-colored tunic." Now, when we get to verse 3, a lot has already happened. You'll recall that the favoritism we read about Jacob and Rebekah, and then later the favoritism, Jacob loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Isaac. And I'm sorry, I got that wrong. Jacob was loved by Rebekah, and Esau was loved by Isaac. Remember when Abraham lied about Sarai, getting her to agree to say that she's his sister? Then later, with Abimelech, Isaac does the same thing with Rebekah. That's my sister. That gave us these clues that there's fractures in this family. And here we have a retrofracture, more favoritism. Verse 3, "Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons." That's Moses telling us that. That's the narrator telling us that. The narrator is an omniscient character in the Bible. He's the one that stands outside of it, knows everything, knows what they think, knows what they're doing, knows why they're doing. So when he mentions their motivations and he speaks, you can take his words to the bank. And he's letting you know Jacob loved, or Israel at this point, he's using the name Israel. Israel loved Joseph. How much did he love him? More than all his brothers. Or more than all his sons. Why? Because he was the son of his old age. That was Rachel's first son. So these past events are brought to bear in the present. And we can imagine where Jacob may have found the notion of showing favoritism from his parents. And this teaches us, to me, an important lesson. It's this, and I said this last week, and I'll say it again, it bears repeating. For us, children don't often do what we tell them, they do what they see. And that's not always the case. There's children with horrible parents and don't want anything to be like their parents, and they try to do something different and better. That does happen. But generally, children don't do what we tell them, they do what they see. They do what their parents model the way for them. So Isaac, the text doesn't need to tell us where Isaac got the notion to lie about Rebekah with Abimelech. He saw his dad do it, or heard about it at least, when they went down to Egypt and Pharaoh took her. Then he does it. And the implication is he knows about it. Jacob knew that he was a mama's boy and that Esau was loved by Isaac, his dad. Esau, in that pericope with that story between the favoritism there, Jacob was never called Isaac's son. It was Esau that was always called Isaac's son, my son, my boy. That's his boy. It's his son. It's his favorite one. There's fractures there. So where's this favoritism coming from? Jacob has it from inherent in his family. He's seen it. He's embodying it. He's becoming like it. This overt favoritism by Israel here is shameful. And the reason was, he's my son of my old age. No, he's not. Benjamin would be. Benjamin's the one that he had as the oldest, but it can't be Benjamin because Benjamin is an omen of death. Rachel died giving birth to Benjamin. So Jacob will be my favorite. Rachel, my beloved, died. I don't blame Benjamin, but Benjamin is the reason she died. He reminds him of Rachel's death. So to me, it's easy to see why Joseph is Israel's favorite. But this is not how Israel should have behaved. Not only is Joseph the favored son, but it seems that Jacob actually made this young man the foreman over his brothers. Notice the phrase, and he made him a very varied colored coat. Now, here's a spoiler. We don't know what that means. We kind of know. There's two views. One view is that it simply means a long coat, sort of like what a major domo would wear above and over his peers that he's in charge of. And others say, no, it was multiple colors. Now, historically, there are reliefs and archaeological evidence of a people group coming out of Egypt wearing multicolored coats, right? Historically, there's archaeological evidence for that. There's a tomb that's shaped in a small pyramid that has multicolors on it, and a lot of scholars believe that's Joseph's tomb, where he was initially buried, and it's colored with these different colors in the same reliefs that their clothing is colored in of these Hebrews coming out of Egypt. So there's historical, archaeological evidence to suggest there's multiple colors on it, that was what they wore. But here it seems that it's only Joseph that's wearing it, not the others. Joseph was given the coat. Whatever the coat was, whether it was multicolored or it just meant it went down to the sleeves went to the wrists and past the knees. It was a long coat. It was an overcoat. It was a fancy coat. It was the Gucci of his day. No one else had this. He was the only one that had it. That's the point. I lean towards it was both. It was a long coat and it was multicolored. It didn't have to be either or because of the historical, archaeological evidence that these people did wear differently than their other neighboring cultures. They were unique. There was an otherness about these people that's maintained in the ancient Near East. There's similarities, but the differences are in the difference. And there was an otherness to them when they come out of Egypt. So it is possible that when they went into Egypt and went into bondage, and they knew the story of the coat, that became their symbol and they started wearing it, and that's what they wore coming out of Egypt. Does that make sense? So I think it could have been a multicolored coat. I think we're on good ground there. But, the lexicons don't let you become so certain about it. But who made the multicolored coat? Now, notice verse 3, it says that he was the son of his old age, and he, that's Jacob, or Israel now, made him a varied colored tunic. And that should give us pause right there. And let me say, okay, the normal plain reading of the text is what we strive for, yes? Unless there's something in the text, in the original language, that makes it seem like that's the actual meaning, because Moses is cool and really highbrow with his pen, that he does things, he's doing something with what he's writing. And he uses a particular verb form here that is really interesting, okay? And it points to something. And the verb form is, I don't need to read Hebrew to you, but it's a vav plus a perfect. And a vav plus a perfect, when it's not standing at the head of a sentence, usually connotes an iterative action, a repeated action. So when it says that he made him a multicolored tunic or a varicolored tunic, that's not the true sense of it. It's that he was continually making these for him. Now, think about it. Anyone ever had a baby? And then they grow? Like we had to buy shoes the other day for one of the kids because their feet don't stay the same size. And then what do you, yeah, that's right. Not only do they want to eat every day, but they grow. And as they grow, what do you have to do? Get them some hand-me-downs or get them another set of clothing that's larger. And as they grow, get them another set of clothing that's larger. And I think that's what's happening with Joseph. He was his favorite. And as he was a little boy, as he grew, he would repeatedly make these coats for him. That's what the verb tense here communicates. Or the choice of verb is an iterative action. He would make these things for him. But it also raises a question. There was a point in the text that Moses wanted us to hear that Joseph was in the field with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah. Why mention them? And I think this is why. When he uses his verb about this, he would make him this coat, not just once. It's not one coat the way we've been taught to think about it. It's he outgrew it and they make him another one. He outgrew it and make him another one. But the problem is, that's not Jacob's trade. Jacob's trade, he's not a seamstress. He's an animal husband in animal husbandry. He knows about flocks and he's older now. He's not. So either he sat on his rocking table and learned how to knit, or he's still mad at Bilhah, and he's putting everyone in their place, and you're going to make this for my son. Because it's repeated. It's not just once. I don't see Jacob sitting down and learning to knit. Not in his enclave with favoritism and the nonsense that Reuben did with Bilhah. I can easily see him repeatedly make it. And I think the implication in the text is that he has them doing it. That's why they're mentioned there. Joseph in connection with the sons of these servant women. So it's highly likely, you don't have to accept it. Again, we love the plain reading of the text, but there's these nuances there in the Hebrew that this verb tense and then this mentioning of Bilhah and Zilpah that tells you something else is going on here. I think he's making them do it. You servant women, you're going to make this for my son who's my favorite. But they're the mothers of his other sons who aren't favored. You see the tension this can cause in the home? So they hated him. It's this, you got to really kind of just feel the presence of this hate. They saw, verse 4, his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, and so they hated him and could not even speak to him on friendly terms. And the word friendly there is shalom, on peaceful terms, on shalom. They couldn't even speak shalom to him. I have a guy used to, years ago when we were in the gang, he was one of the gang members. And he has a son. And he has a daughter. His daughter's the oldest. And one of my friends that's not affiliated with the gang but kept in contact with those guys ran into him. He's an inmate at the jail. And I was a chaplain there, so I was like, hey, what are you doing? He was from the old neighborhood, so I brought him into the office to sit down and just catch up with him and, see how he was doing and why was he in jail and all that. And he was telling me that a few months before I had seen him in the jail, that he was at this guy that I'm talking about, not the guy in the jail with me. He's talking about another guy that I was in the gang with years ago. This is 25 years ago. That guy had 2 children, a daughter and a son. The daughter was older and then a little boy. And he was like, man, it was awkward a couple months ago. I go, why? He says, we were at this party. It was the daughter's party. I think she was turning 19 or something like that, 20. And they were having a big party for her. And a lot of old friends, and my cousins are still affiliated with some of those guys. So he was naming people that I knew to this day that were there at this party. And he said, man, it got really awkward. I said, why? He said that his little boy, his son, I think he was like 14. The older sister is several years apart. I think she's like 18 or 19, something like that. That was and that him and his dad got in an argument in front of everyone at the party. And then the little boy said, I'll call him little boy, he's a teenager. But he said, you've never loved me. You only love her. You've never done anything like this for me. I'm nothing to you. And you know what? You're nothing to me. And he stormed off in front of everyone. Can you imagine that awkwardness? Right? I want you to sit there and really just think about that. Imagine being in a room and that happening. Imagine if that was you, the unloved one or the one who wasn't favored. And imagine if you were the one that was favored and how, you don't care what I'm the favored one. What do I care about the other ones? You see, all this tension that's built up here. They hated him because his dad favored him. And some of them, the boys of the servant, hated him probably even more because maybe, if I'm onto something here, he was making their mom build this coat for him, and he was placed over us, shepherding us, watching us, giving a bad report about us. You see the problem here? Favoritism from retrofractures. Jacob, of all people, should have known better. For his transformation that we read about, he misses it here. The degree to which they hated him, they couldn't even speak friendly to him. They couldn't speak to him on shalom terms. And then there's a next play on words. Joseph sees them. He sees them. What does he do? He brings a bad report. They see that their father loved him more and they couldn't speak peaceably to him. So verse 2, where it says his father and Joseph brought back a bad report, it's the Hebrew root right there, devatam, right? Because he brought a, quote, bad report, and then the same root is used right here. They could not speak, debaro. Similar Hebrew roots. They're from the same root family. He speaks bad report to his father, therefore they can't speak a good thing to him. See the relationship of the words here? How we speak to each other matters. So these points, but this doesn't stop here. It continues into the next section. So now we're going to see the dreaming dreams and the heightening of the hate, verses 5 through 11. And then the dreaming of dreams, round 1, verses 5 through 8. And verse 5 says, then Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. And there's that notion of speaking again when he told it to his brothers. The last thing we read in verse 4 is they can't even speak to him in shalom terms, on friendly terms. And then he has a dream. What or whom is the source of the dream? In this text, God is never said to have provided the dream. But it doesn't mean that God didn't give it. You can hold on to that. It doesn't mean God's not involved. He is. He's involved in this story. But there is ambiguity here. How Moses has laid this out. I think there's two principles at work here with this dream before we get into the actual contents of the dream. The first one is, if God is at work here through these dreams, then why has he distanced himself? Why has God distanced himself? Who's the last person to speak to God in the text? Jacob. Who's the one that wrestled with God face to face when he met the man in the darkness when he was afraid to face Esau? Jacob. Who did God walk with in that three-person theophany and have a meal with? Abraham. And all we get is this ambiguity of him having a dream. If it's from God, then why is God only speaking to a dream? Why isn't he showing up and speaking to Joseph face to face? You start seeing God distance himself. And then you start seeing in Exodus God showing up again in a personal presence with Moses. So if God is at work here, and I think he is, through these dreams, he's distanced himself. We can at least say that much. And then there's a parallel. Suppose that these dreams are divine revelation, that God has given Joseph divine revelation. That's what these dreams are. They are special revelation. The text doesn't tell us one way or the other, but suppose they are. Is there a parallel to this in previous passages? I think we get close to one in Genesis 25, verse 23, when God speaks to Rebekah about the pregnancy. In chapter 25, verse 23, Yahweh said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples will be separated from your body, and one people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. That's the revelation she gets directly from God. God speaks to Rebekah straightforward, straight to her. To Rachel. And God gives her an important piece of revelation. And then the story plays out, and you see what God says to her actually came about. He gives her this revelation, and then you see the story play out. Esau and Jacob and the jockeying for the blessing. And then at the end of the story, the blessing went to the right son, but in the midst of the story, you see all of these mistakes that they made. In the same way, the parallel is Joseph has a dream. Then we're going to see the story play out, and then we're going to see how the elements of the dream actually come to pass. Now, this is not without problems in one way, because later you're going to see Joseph realizes that his brothers are in Egypt to buy grain, and then he's going to mistreat them, and he maneuvers in such a way to bring about the fulfillment of the dream. Turn to Genesis 42 with me really quick. Let me show you something. Let's move over a couple pages, Genesis 42. Now watch this. Now Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt, and Jacob said to his sons, this is really funny, why are you staring at one another? Like, you're just standing around looking at, twiddling your thumbs. Then he said, look, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us. There's that go down, the movement. And buy for us from that place so that we may live and not die. So 10, remember the dream. We're going to read it. There was 11 stars. So Moses is careful here. It says 10 brothers, right? So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt, but Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he said, I am afraid that harm might happen to him. Not the other ones, just this one, because the favoritism transfers from Joseph to Benjamin when he thinks Joseph is dead. So the sons of Israel came to buy grain among those who were coming because the famine was also in the land of Canaan. Now Joseph was the ruler over the land. He was the one who sowed grain to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down to him, with their faces to the ground. When Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he disguised himself to them and spoke to them harshly. He said to them, where have you come from? And they said, from the land of Canaan to buy food. Notice this, verse 8 and 9. But Joseph had recognized his brothers, although they did not recognize him. And Joseph remembered the dreams which he had about them and said to them, now listen, he remembered the dreams. Now, what he's going to do is he's going to plot to get the 11th brother up there. You're spies. You have come to look at the undefended parts of our land. And they said to him, no, my lord. but your servants have come to buy food. We are all sons of one man. We are honest men. No, you're not. Your servants are not spies. Yet he said to them, no, but you have come to look at the undefended parts of our land. But they said, your servants are 12 brothers in all, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And behold, the youngest is with our father today, and one is no longer alive. Yet Joseph said to them, it is as I said to you, you are spies. By this you will be tested. By the life of Pharaoh, you shall not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. So he sees them, 10 brothers. He remembers the dream. Now he wants the 11th one to come. Because what was the dream? We haven't got to it yet, but you know the story. They bow down to him. He wants the dream to come true, so all 11 need to be there for it to be fulfilled. Again, I'm not trying to make things difficult for us. The reality is Moses is written in some ambiguities, and I think they're intentional. They're designed to raise awareness about Joseph's character and how God used him, even with all of his maneuvering, to sustain the family of Israel. So these dreams begin to take on the flavor of self-fulfillment on Joseph's part. This is exactly what Rebekah did. She had the revelation and orchestrated things to bring about the outcome that corresponded to that revelation. Joseph has a dream, and now he's right here, I just read, he's trying to maneuver to make the outcome happen. There's a parallel there. That's all I'm saying. And what does he do? And when he told it to his brothers, verse 5, they hated him even more. Joseph knows they don't like him. Why did he tell it? He didn't have to tell them. He could have kept it to himself. I was a young man. Little kid. I was maybe 11 or 12. We lived in a neighborhood called West End. It's just on the outskirts of West Houston, Shepherd and Fagan and Washington Avenue, that area. They call it the Heights now. Part of it, it's always been called the Heights. And a couple houses down from us, we lived in these row houses. When we moved out of the projects, we moved into these row houses, and but it was a really nice neighborhood. It was really nice. I went to a really great school. I was barely zoned in it by one street, so the school I was second or third grade there, and it really helped me. And but one of my buddies was 2 houses down, and he had a great family. The dad worked in downtown. I don't remember what his profession was, but he did something in oil and gas. He wore suits. And the bus would stop right in front of their house. So he didn't have to drive his car. He'd come out, get on the bus, go to work, and then in the evening he'd come back, get off, and go right in the house. It stopped right in front of his house. He had an older brother that was playing football for St. Thomas High School. This was a good family. The husband and wife had been married to two-parent home. They were doing really well for themselves. And my friend here, he was gifted. He was really smart, intelligent. And then I heard later that he was able to go to UT in Austin, the University of Texas in Austin. But he didn't finish. Then later on, I found out that he started to crawl into a bottle. And I looked, when Facebook became a thing, I remembered him, and he's a childhood friend. We were really close. And our friendship ended because we moved, and 11, 12-year-olds there weren't cell phones back then. You couldn't just keep up. There wasn't social media. You just lost touch. So I found him on Facebook, and I reached out to him. And he pretended he didn't know me. And that's okay. Prayed for him. But I stalked his Facebook page anyway. And see what he was up to. And it was before it's on private now, but before he had it on private, you could see. He had friends that he went to school with. He had friends, family members. They would interact with him on Facebook. He was just a huge jerk to all of them. He'd tell them that this is Facebook, so you're not writing a thesis when you make a comment. He'd correct their grammar. He'd quote David Hume, and he was this proud atheistic kind of mind. His family were all Christians, so if you were of that stripe, he had no use for you. This was a total jerk. And he knew that he was that. And he knew that no one liked him. So when I saw that, I wasn't shocked that he pretended he didn't know who I was. even though we were really good friends back then. And that attitude, I saw how he was carrying on Facebook, treating his own family and his own friends, correcting their grammar and just being a jerk. Right? That's what I see Joseph doing here. Joseph knows they don't like him. They couldn't even speak shalom to him. And then he tells them in verse 6, please. It's the Hebrew now, the particle now, like please. It's an ironic please. It's not even real. It's feigned politeness. Please, listen to this dream that I've had. They can't even speak to him favorably, and he's going and telling them about this dream. And when we read this dream, he's the hero of the dream. The word, they hated him even more in verse 5, before I really get into the dream. The phrase right there, even more, it's a play on words. It's another pun. His name is Yosef, and the word there is Vayosefu. In other words, the more Josephed, the more their hate for him Josephed. I'm telling you, Moses is really good. I wish he'd write my dissertation. And the word hate, they hated him even more. Shares similar formation or morphology, and the root word is similar to when it said that he was the son of 7 and 10 years, the word years. So they hated even more, and there's a parallel, a pun on the use for hate with how old he was, pointing back to, again, setting him up because he's young. In verse 6, and he said to them, please. His pleas versus their desire to speak, to not speak to him in shalom. The irony suggests Joseph is poking at them. Again, he knows that they hate him, so is he really trying to be polite? Joseph knows the content of the dream, which he's about to disclose, and the content of the dream is sure to rile them up. I don't see Joseph's pleas as positive. It's feigned respect. It says, listen to the dream that I have had. Then he begins to recount it, verse 7. For behold, now remember the beholds. Pay attention to the beholds in the text, because they're a discourse marker. In the Joseph story, they're not always this kind of discourse marker in other places in Hebrew, but here in the Joseph story, they seem, when they show up, to always give you the point of view of the speaker that you're supposed to look at what they're looking at, or look at what they're describing. It says, behold. It's in other places, like I said, it's an attention getter. Look here, don't miss this. But for now, behold, the behold statements will get the brother's attention and point it to the dream. Verse 7, for behold, and what's the behold? We were binding sheaves in the field. And then there's another behold. And lo, that word lo there on verse 7 is the same word as behold, vehene. It's the same word as the one that begins verse 7. So now he's like, behold, we were binding sheaves. Point your attention to this. We're binding sheaves. And then behold, my sheaf. And now he's looking at it. Where it says we're binding sheaves, it's literally we were sheaving sheaves in the middle of the field. That's the setting of the dream. Then that second behold statement, where it's translated, and lo, it points you to something in that dream. It focuses our attention to what's next. And we're supposed to, like Joseph's brother, visualize what he's saying. Let's take a look. My sheaf rose up and stood erect, or stood tall, or something like that. And this conjures the increasing size of this sheaf, this bundle of wheat. And it reminds me of that scene from Aladdin, not the live action, but the animated version, where Genie comes out and he rises up over Aladdin with this imposing presence. That's the image I think this conjures up. But that's not the main point of the dream. Having a sheaf growing and growing, towering in the field is one thing, but notice what others do, what the other sheaves do. And then there's another behold. And behold, your sheaves. What did they do? They gathered and bowed down to my sheaf. Let's recap. He's young and in charge when he shouldn't be. He's favored by dad, so he acts as their shepherd, and thus they hate him. Some of their moms potentially have had to be his personal seamstress as he grew up making these coats for him. Maybe it was Jacob or maybe it was them. It could go either way. I lean towards what I expressed earlier. He brings a bad report to dad about their goings-ons in the field, so they could not speak to him favorably or in shalom. He knows they hate him. And then he has these dreams, and do you know he didn't have to tell him? He could have just kept it in his heart and let things play out. But no, not Joseph. He had to express it to them. Knowing the content of the dream, he told them anyway. And this stirs them up. Notice their reaction, verse 8. Then his brother said to him, are you actually going to reign over us? That's their interpretation of the dream. Now, it's stronger than the English translation here where it says, are you actually? That captures kind of the essence, but it denotes, maybe, maybe not. Are you actually? It's not as strong as the word certainly. Are you certainly going to reign over us? It's an infinitive plus the verb in the same root. It gives this sense of like, it's in Genesis where it says, the day you eat of it, dying you will die. Surely you will die. Certainly you will die. So the word actually here, I think it's a little weaker. It's stronger than that. And they're telling him, are you certainly going to be our ruler? They all have grain in the dream. They all have sheaves. But Joseph's grain is going to grow in volume and stature, meaning Joseph is going to grow in stature. The dream is about grain, but it really is about Joseph's rule over them. That's how they're viewing it, and they continue. Or are you really going to rule over us? So the first one, are you going to reign over us? And then the second one, are you going to rule over us? Same conclusion. And it's the same construction, an infinitive with the verb in the same stem or the same root. Are you certainly going to rule? Now, the word for rule here is mashal. This is the same word that was used for the sun and the moon at the creation story in Genesis that rule over the day and rule over the night. Same word, because now his next dream is going to be about the sun and the moon and about ruling. When it is said that the greater light would rule, that's the word mashal, the day, and the lesser light would rule, mashal, the night. It's the same word that God used when he told Eve that her desire would be for her ish, the man, but that he would rule, mashal, over her. And then when she gives birth to Cain, she thinks something other of Cain. She says, I have given birth to the ish, Yahweh. This intertextual link is not by accident. The two terms that are used are important. The word, the first word where he says you reign, it's the king, the word for king, melech. When you reign, it's the root of the idea of reigning as king, royalty. And then the next line, are you going to rule over us, is the idea of governing with mashal. These two words are descriptors of the kingly and governing rule Adam was supposed to have. But after his failure, it's now passed to the seed of the woman. That's the one, the only one who can be king and rule, malach, and who can be said to govern or rule, mashal. Thus, it's very plausible that they believe that Joseph believes he is the seed of the woman. These intertextual links are not by accident. That he uses two words that are pointed because God had already expanded the promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob about a king coming from him. So this idea of this kingship. And we know that Lamech in Genesis 5 thought Noah was him, but it wasn't Noah. We know he got that idea from Eve because Eve thought it was Cain, but it wasn't Cain. And then when you see Abraham, we think Abraham's the next hero, but he falters. And then we see Isaac, and Isaac, even though they had faith, he falters. And they make mistakes. And then Jacob, of course, and now his sons. But I think it's very plausible that they believe that Joseph believes he's the seed of the woman. The sun and the moon rule. And then mankind was supposed to rule, Adam and Eve in the garden, rule the creation. And they failed, so now the seed of the woman will rule. And now the brothers think Joseph thinks he will rule. That's how they're interpreting the dream. What's the outcome? What do you think they think about all this? You, Joseph? So they hated him. They vayosefu. They Josephed him even more. They hated him even more for his dreams. Another play on words. Not just for his dreams, but for his words. And there's that concept of speaking again, words, devarim. The words harkens back to the roots, bad report, and they could not speak the same root, shalom, to him. So the dreams and the words heighten hate, dearly beloved. This is how Joseph sounds to his brothers. Hey, you think you're something. A man paid a visit to a local psychologist. When the doctor asked him what had prompted the visit, the man said, I'm suffering from an inferiority complex. In the ensuing weeks, the psychologist put his new patient through an intensive battery of tests. Next came the long wait while the test results were tabulated and appropriate correlations were made. Finally, the doctor called the man and asked him to return to the clinic. I have some interesting news for you, the doctor began. Well, what's that? Asked the man. It's no complex, the psychologist retorted. You are inferior. That's how Joseph sees his brothers. And that's how they perceive he sees them. If we're inferior to you, it makes you so special. That's round one of the dream. That's round 2, verses 9 through 11. Now he had still another dream and related it to his brothers and said, Lo, there's the word behold again. So it points our attention. I have had still another dream. And behold, there's another behold statement. The sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. It's their current disposition. And he related it to his brothers. What's their current disposition? Intense hate. They hate him. Anger. And Joseph keeps needling them. Again, he didn't have to tell these dreams to any of them. And what is the dream? Previously mentioned, the root mashal sort of foreshadowed the mention of rulership. So the sun and moon were given dominion over day and night. Adam was given dominion over the whole creation but lost it. And now the seed of the woman will be given dominion. So these dreams have messianic undertones in them. Notice the description. And lo, another behold statement, which draws our attention to the recounting of the dream. Lo, I have had still another dream. Then we get one more behold statement, which turns our attention to the imagery of the dream. And behold, the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. Whether from God or not, Joseph's dreams are not helping his relationship with his brothers. However, this time they are not the ones who interpret it. Notice verse 10. He related it to his father and to his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, What is this dream that you have had? Shall I and your mother and your brothers actually come to bow ourselves down before you to the ground? This suggests that either he told it twice, once in their presence, then again in theirs and their father's presence, or he told it once, but the narrator waited until now to tell us that Jacob or / Israel was there. Now, I think based on the verb where it says, verse 10, he related it to his father, that's a viator verb which moves the narrative along, and it's logically or chronologically the next thing. So I think he told it twice. And based on Joseph's character that we've discerned so far, that he told it twice, Joseph can't keep these words in. I think they were all hanging around. I think he told his brothers one time, and then they were all hanging around, and Dad was there, and he wanted Dad to hear it, so he told it again to his dad, and his brothers were right there. And notice the outcome, and his father rebuked him. Well, amen, Jacob. Amen. You finally rebuked the favored son, something I never thought you would do, my good sir. This is a shift. He's his father's favorite, but now he's getting rebuked for his dream. Why is he getting rebuked? Because in his dream, Jacob's bowing down. So for right here, when he rebukes him, that's a good sign for Israel, old Israel here. But he interprets a dream. Notice what he says. He says, what is this dream that you have had? That's the opening question. And now he gives the interpretation. Shall I and your mother? Mother's dead, so who is he talking about? Probably one of the women that make the tunic. I don't know. Talking about one of them. Maybe he's thinking she'll be resurrected and we'll bow to him. I don't know. It's ambiguous. Well, shall I and your mother and your brothers actually come to bow ourselves down before you to the ground? And that idea of actually come, it's the same thing, the same construction as before, the infinitive with the verb of the same root, so it intensifies it. Will we certainly bow to you? Jacob is hot. He's miffed, as they say. The word bow ourselves, the word that it describes the action of falling on your knees, sitting back on your feet, on your legs, and then stretching yourself out on the ground before someone. It has to do with worship. When a king takes over a land and he captures the land, or he besieges the city and he wins the battle, and the king of the losing party comes before him and he creates this vassal kind of a relationship, all right? I'll let you live, but you have to serve me and you have to pay tribute to me. That king has to fall on his knees, sit back on his haunches, and reach forward and bow before the king that defeated him. This concept of submission can connote worship of someone who's higher than you. And that's his dream, that they're worshiping him. He's higher than them. Or at minimum, paying homage to him. And we get the other outcome, verse 11. His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. It really stops short. It just says father kept. This means he kept, but the translators add the word to smooth it out. Kept it in his mind, or held on to the idea of what Joseph had just said. But that's round two. One dreamer, two dreams, different dreams. One about sheaves, but his sheaf ruling them, and the other one about the sun, the moon, and the stars. These textual links in it have messianic undertones. Joseph is a dreamer, and he's dreaming big things about himself. And the text is intentionally ambiguous of the source of these dreams. It brings me to the next point, and then we'll be done. Divine intervention or a random rambler. Verses 12 through 17. Now, the first point is verse 12, downstream from the dreamer of dreams. Then verse 12, then his brothers went to pasture their flocks, their father's flocks in Shechem. They got out of there. Can't be around this boy. We got to get out of there. They got away from him. But where do they go? Go to Shechem. What happened in Shechem? That's where they killed all the men. But they own land there. Remember, Jacob bought the land that they were pasturing the flock? That's where they go. They go back to the land where they're pasturing the flock that they own on the outskirts of the village of all the men that they killed. I don't think this is wise. They do it. So they're downstream from this dreamer of dreams. They had to get away from him. And where do they go? They'd rather be in the place where all that bloodshed occurred than with this boy over here. And then something happens. Father's favorite is commissioned to a mission. I like just rhyming words, so there you go. Could have been a rapper. Verses 13 through 14. Israel said to Joseph, are not your brothers pasturing the flock in Shechem? He wants to know, are they where they're supposed to be? And it's almost this feeling of, should they even be there? He's worried. Why is he worried? What happened the last time they were there? They pillaged the whole place. Dinah was raped, so they went and murdered all the men and raped the city. Metaphorically. So there's Shechem. Come, I will send you to them. And notice what Joseph says. And he said to him, I will go. So Joseph, the shepherd of his brothers, ever ready to go shepherd, knowing they hate him, knowing they want to get away from him, knowing they hate him for his words and his dreams, and he said, I'll go. You'd think by this point, after reading the narrative, he'd say, you know, they really don't want me around. I'm not going to do it, Dad. You really would, like if we really just put ourselves in those shoes, you can kind of see that. Not him. Jacob wants a report. Israel wants a report. Shechem is bad news for Israel. It left a mark on him. When I was 16, it's Halloween night, 1996. I'll never forget it. One of my friends had an abusive dad. They were our very next door neighbor, and he was my best friend at the time. And his dad was a member of a cartel in the borderlands of Mexico. And his dad was super abusive to the mom. You can hear the domestic violence. You can hear him hitting her and her screaming. These houses we lived in, paper thin walls, quarter-inch drywall. And you can hear everything. And they were right next to you. You can hear it. And when my buddy turned 16, he was able to find a way to get his mom out of the house when the dad was in Mexico. And when the dad got back from Mexico, he was really angry at my friend. That this is dysfunction in the superlative degree. He said, I'm going to kill my son. I'm going to kill my son. He was so angry with him. And my buddy had an older brother who didn't have quite moral integrity, fortitude. And he broke back into the house when he knew his dad wasn't there and stole a bunch of drugs from him that he had stashed in the attic. He was a cartel member. So he just this family was fractured. And Halloween night, 1996, my buddy comes back to the neighborhood. He had been gone for several months hiding mom out. Comes back to the neighborhood to visit everybody, but doesn't want his dad to see him. But his dad sees him. And his dad says, you got 15 minutes to get out this neighborhood, I'm going to shoot you. So my buddy says, hey, let's walk up the street and let's ask, this other friend that lived down the street to give me a ride out of the neighborhood. If not, I have to run out of here. So I walked with him down the street, and when we got to the corner, the ditches in this neighborhood, small back street, but really deep ditches. When we got to the corner, we just see a car. It was his dad's car just rushing towards us. And then he just started firing at us. His own son. I felt kind of took that personal because I'm right with him. So I jumped in the ditch to get out the way. And my friend pulls out his pistol, starts shooting at the car, and kills his dad. 16 years old. Halloween night. At that time, I worked at the Popeyes. It was 2 blocks away. I was the best batter fry cook they ever saw. I could season chicken fast. We used to race, and I would always win. I was just cold with the chicken. And I used to have to walk up that half street to go through the trail to get to the block where the Popeyes was on the main street. And when that happened, and I don't want to walk there anymore. Just had this dark presence, just this feeling, it marked you. I couldn't walk by there anymore. And I'll spare you the description of what this man looked like in the aftermath. I saw it. I was 16 too. Kids don't need to see that. So every time I would walk by there was these eerie moments where it was like there was this huge bird in a tree when I was walking by there one night. I'd close the restaurant, so I'd leave at 12:30, midnight, somewhere around there, 1 in the morning, and I'd walk through that trail and walk right by that spot where he got killed. It's still fresh. And there's this huge bird in the tree, like a silhouette of a huge bird, and it just felt off, felt demonic, felt heavy. I didn't like that, so I started going, I'd rather walk all the way around than to go by there again. It took months for me, years for me to get over that, to forget that. Much less my friend who actually did it, and it was his dad. So when these guys go and they murder all these men in Shechem and all the bloodshed and the wailing of these women and these children, and they take them into their camp, and now they're back over there shepherding the flock where this just happened not long ago, you think Jacob is like, what's going on here? So he sends Joseph, go check on them. I need to make sure everything's okay. Go now, see about the welfare, verse 14, of your brothers and the welfare of the flock, and bring a report. There's that word again, the word, the same root. Bring a word back to me. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. That's Joseph. So father's favorite, he's on a mission. He's got to go find these brothers, and they're in this dark place where bad stuff happened before. He gets lost. Lost in a random rambler, verses 15 through 17. Verse 15, a man found him. And behold, he was wandering in a field, and a man asked him, what are you looking for? The verse 15 is interesting. It's the word Ish. And it's just a random man who shows up out of nowhere. Similar kind of context and syntax of the man that showed up in the evening to Jacob. And you might see where I'm going with this. It's just a man, an Ish. And it links to the Ish who will rule Eve, who she gave birth to an Ish who thinks it's the Messiah, but it's Cain, and she was let down. And then it links back to this Ish who wrestles Jacob, and he says, I have seen the face of God. And then now Joseph is lost, and there's this rambler, and he's called an Ish. These intertextual links. Now, you don't have to take it this way, but I'm going to tell you what I think. I think Joseph has a messianic complex with his dreams. Yet the Ish out of nowhere shows up, like Tom Bombadil in The Lord of the Rings, and points him to the right direction. And think about it. Without this Ish, without this man, there is no story. Without this Ish, Joseph doesn't find his brothers. Without this Ish, this man, his brothers don't do what they're about to do to him in the very next verse after verse 17. Without this Ish, Joseph doesn't get down to Egypt. This is who I think this Ish is. I think this is the same theophany that appeared to Jacob. This is not some random man. If you want to call it a Christophany, that's fine. I won't take issue with you. But I think in some way God shows up and interacts with Joseph. You have this messianic complex, and here's the divine pointing you in the right direction. It says, and behold, this again points our attention to Joseph's point of view. He was wandering in the field, and behold, he was wandering in the field, verse 15. Now, the first mention of field in this text was the sheaves in his dream. Now he's in the field, but no sheaves. Instead, there's the Ish. And the man found him wandering. What are you looking for? Joseph replies, verse 16. I'm looking for my brothers. Please, there's the particle now again. And this is, I think, sincere. Please, tell me where they are. He wants to get that report back to dad. Please, tell me where they're pasturing the flock. He's polite. It's a polite please. I think he means it. Not like when he spoke to his brothers. Please. And the Ish said, they've moved on from here. And then he says something else. It's interesting. For I heard them say. Now, I need you to get this picture. In this region, where they're pasturing their flocks, there's not a lot of foot traffic of folks just walking around. It's barren. Some of these flocks, you'd be surprised what they survive on. There's only little pieces of grass to stick up from the rocks, and it's just enough to sustain the flock. They'll go and get, with their tongue, they'll twist it and pull the grass out and go to the next thing. And part of it's very desolate. So you don't expect to have a man that can hear what they just said when they're out pasturing the flock. Now maybe, they were in a crowded area where people were just passing through a path or something. That's possible. Again, you don't have to take it this way. But he says, for I heard them. And what did they say? For I heard them say, let's go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. And to me, it seems incredible that this Ish could have heard them say this. Unless he tells Joseph. So Joseph went after his brothers and he found them in Dothan. The man was right. He nailed it. This is a theophany, or if you want to call it a Christophany, then when later Joseph had revealed himself to his brothers, and they were worried that he would enact revenge on them. Notice what he tells them. This is in chapter 50. He says, quote, but Joseph said to them, do not be afraid, for am I in God's place? By now he's got it. He knows he's not the Messiah. If he had a Messiah complex, if you take that as I do. Verse 20, as for you, you meant evil against me. Watch this. But God meant it for good in order to bring about this present result, to preserve many people alive. Now, here's the thing. He says, you meant it for evil. When did they mean it for evil? The very next verses, right after verse 17, they start doing their evil. And he says, but God meant it for good. And who happens to be there right before their evil? This Ish. I think Joseph is hearkening back to this man. I think that's the same thing Jacob did when he wrestled with the man. He said, I have seen the face of God and lived. Here, Joseph has put the situation in its proper perspective and attributes God's intervention and the brother's evil as orchestrated for a higher purpose. Verse 21, so therefore, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones. So he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Now again, you don't have to agree with this take, and that's okay. But I believe there is enough intertextuality here to consider that this is a plausible take on this. He says, you meant it for evil, and then when you read the evil, the man is right before it, but God meant it for good. So this Ish is not a random rambler in my view. God's intervening here. Without this man, there is no story. So retrofractures and a dreamer of dreams. We set up some things in verse 1. We looked at some puns, and they keep repeating. Puns painting a painful picture, favoritism, a dreaming dreams and heightening the hate, verses 5 through 11. And we looked at divine intervention or a rambling rambler. Well, so what? How can we apply this today? There's a thing about application. It's got to be derived from the text. We're against moralism, and here's what I mean. There's people that think the Old Testament is all about morals, moralism. Do this, don't do that, do that. It's not it. The Bible does want us to be moral. The Bible does call us to a higher standard of living and how to present ourselves and to be a testimony and all that. All those things are true. But it's the why. It's the why. These applications are derived from the text. It's why are we striving to sanctify? Why are we striving? To be saved? No. Never that. Because we're saved. So when we have this tremendous gratitude of what God has done on our behalf, right? We should strive to, but that does not mean that it's either or. It does not mean that it's either the Old Testament's moral, or it's either that you're saved by grace because you couldn't save yourself. It's by faith alone in Christ alone, that our standard talking point. But it's not either or. It's not a false dichotomy. The Old Testament words things in such a way that we're supposed to get the point, and we're supposed to look at ourselves while understanding that it's all His grace. While understanding that we can't save ourselves. No amount of moralism and trying to be good and trying to have this good ethic and tell all my brothers because they're wrong and I'm doing the right thing by telling Dad, I'm the moralist of the family and they hate me because I'm right. No amount of rightness gets you into heaven. No amount of rightness gets us right with God. Only faith does that. These stories teach us that you need faith because they're broken. None of them get it right. So when we deal with these applications, I do my best to derive them from the way Moses has worded things to point our attention to these things. First thing I want to say is it's something we must believe. And what we must believe is that God's sovereignty is manifested through human frailty. If these stories don't teach us anything else, they teach us that. God's sovereignty, how he gives this, if God is the source of the dreams, it was enough to get them to act in a certain way to bring about the outcome he wanted to save their lives. And if the dreams are just from Joseph's own design, then the man showing up and intervening, even though these brothers are frail and they hate their brother and they're jealous, and Joseph is a talker and he's always wanting to be on Front Street and he wants to be the leader and snitch on his brothers, God still shows up if he's the Ish in that story and points him to his brothers so the story could continue, so that the outcome would be that they would restore and save all these lives. God's sovereignty is manifested through all of this human frailty that we've read. And that, to me, leads me to consider something. And this is rooted right from these dreams and what I think Joseph thought of himself, is that thinking one is higher than he actually is can actually teach us about humility. I think Joseph lacked a lot of humility at 17 and put in this position that he should have never been in. And let me tell you what I mean when I say humility for us as we leave here today. Humility is not, oh, no. You know, those oversaved Christians, just, oh, no, just me and Jesus. That's not humility. True humility is not putting yourself higher than you are and not putting yourself lower than you are. Is accepting exactly where you are in any moment. That's humility. Joseph doesn't do that. He's got this complex, these dreams with these messianic undertones. His brothers certainly interpret it that way, that he thinks he's a somebody, that he's more than he is. So if God's sovereignty is manifested through human frailty, then let's be humble about what God might be doing in our lives and what he might be doing through us for others in this world. And second thing is, the theme of the words in this text, the root devarim or devar, it shows up so many times that there's a theme of when words are spoken that cannot be missed in this text. It's intentional. And every time you see these words, bad report, or he said this, and they could not speak favorably to him, or they hated him even more, the outcome of using words in the way that they're using them here is hate. That's the outcome. And that's derived directly from the text, dearly beloved. Moses wants us to think about our words, to think about the words, how they're used here. Are we doing that? Are we that way? Are we, haughty and looking down on our siblings or on other people and thinking we're better than everyone else? Have we been thrust into positions of power that we didn't deserve and weren't trained for, and then we just mess it all up? Are we showing favoritism to our own offspring and making some feel inferior? Blended families really have to walk carefully with these things. But not just blended families, all families. The theme of words and their outcomes in this text is undeniable. So my question to us this morning is, how do we use our words with the people that are closest to us in our sphere of influence and in our workplaces and in our relationships? And I ask you to consider this. In terms of the use of words in this text, who are we most like? Joseph? Jacob? The brothers? I think we should be like the Ish, who just said things as they were. They went there, and I heard them say this, and I heard them go there. That's our application today. I feel convicted. Sometimes I'm not careful with my words. Customer service representatives, if they ever attended this church, I recognize your voice. You know, even when we mess up, he is so gracious to us. The way he's gracious to them. What a mess. And apart from this story, Israel would not be preserved, and the Messiah would not live the life that we never lived and pay the price that we. Isn't that wonderful? That is what this is all about. Father, we love you. We thank you that you're so gracious that you let me go over by 10 minutes. This text is so rich. There's so much to uncover, so much left unsaid. But man, it teaches us. And if anything, it teaches me just how gracious you are, because these people were messed up. And we're messed up. And you were so pleased to send your son while we were yet sinners.